We are recording.
Okay, before we go through the assessment of your own essays, what I'm going to do is just very quickly go through the marking and how we mark an essay. So what we'd do, obviously make sure you understand the question first, the context, the fact that you're a young entrepreneur, in this case setting up a business to provide a health and fitness gym in your local community. Then look at what it's asking you for. So there are three parts to this question: hardware, communication technologies and software. And as with any essay question, it's asking us to discuss. So which ones we'd need before we start trading and why you would need them. Okay, so that's important, why we would need to buy before we started setting up our gym. Okay, so what we'd do, read the essay, perhaps read it twice, and then we'd start off at the top here. So we'd check first of all if you've shown little understanding and you've made at least reference to at least one of hardware, communication technologies or software. If you've done clear that you've done lots more than that, then we'd perhaps not read the rest and jump straight onto the mark range, mid-mark range. Then we're looking for at least two from still hardware, communication technologies and software. So you've got to have two of these three. If again you've done more than that, then again we might not, as long as it's well written, it's pretty well written, we can read it, we understand it, we're not constantly having to stop for language, the form of writing, to understand what you meant, and it is relevant, you've not just listed these things, then we'll jump onto the good mark range. This is where most of you are at the moment, so we'll stop in here. Candidate has made some reference to hardware, communication technologies and software. So at this point you have got to have mentioned all three different types. Otherwise we're going to jump back here and then decide if you're securely in this or whether you're towards the top end, which would put you on a 9 or a 10. But if you have mentioned all three, then we're looking to see if you've used some specialist vocabulary and meaning is clear. We're also looking to see whether you've described here, and that's important, and I'll come back to it later.
Bang it all together.
Right, we're looking, I've just mentioned that this describes why it's important, we'll come on to that in a minute. We're then looking to see if your form of writing style is appropriate, not in the first person, it is formal. Might have occasional lapses, and that's okay at this point. The candidate has expressed moderately complex ideas, so that means you're starting to be a little bit more technical, how they would be used, perhaps problems for perhaps with Wi-Fi, if you're going to mention that in this article as a communication technology, saying that you perhaps need more than one Wi-Fi access point in order to cover the whole gym. Candidate has used well-linked sentences and paragraphs. That means it flows on from each other. You're not just jumping randomly from one idea to the next. You've grouped perhaps all your technologies that relate to each other in the same bit.
And that's where a plan is very, very important there, so it will enable you to link very nicely between different things.
And actually having read them, that says it's quite obvious looking at the plans which ones are going to go well, and perhaps with your spider diagram or mind map, whatever you want to call it, that you number the order that you're going to write about them in, and that's why we talk about that. And again, then the next one, occasional spelling errors, and you might use that just to decide which level. If we by this point we've decided it's in this bracket, these last two bits will decide whether it's the bottom end or the top end. Mm-hmm. Then we move on to the next one. If we think we've done all of that, we'll just check, discuss. You've at this point again you've got to cover all three parts, but this one we're talking about a discussion where we perhaps might talk about different technologies that could do the same thing. For example, perhaps communicating around the gym using walkie-talkies or mobile phones, and to discuss the difference, the benefits and limitations of both. The other thing we might do is perhaps not suggest alternatives, but discuss any problems that might happen. For example, you may mention email as a communication technology or a piece of software, and discuss the implications as well as the benefits. So for example, it might mean that they need antivirus software as well, because viruses are been known to come in emails. And you need to pick one of those two forms of discussions. And this is the hardest part, this discussion bit. And this is where, as we go through it, we'll talk about whether you've myself and Mr. Gould-Elia will talk about whether you've discussed or described in an essay, and that is the main difference between a 15 marker being stuck on that 15 and moving into the top bracket.
And it's actually quite difficult to get into this top bracket. That's why it is this high bracket, because the discussion is obviously a far more complex thing.
Right. And then again, the rest of these things, which are just
they are there to help us work out where you come within that boundary quite often. Obviously, the most important part is that first sentence in all of those bands.
This bit here. And you've got to make sure you've covered all of these parts which are mentioned in the question.